So welcome back to Third Age Reforged and to another scenario on a map that we have seen a couple of times before, although never has it been used for a scenario, I don't believe, mainly because I think, based on the deployment zones we've seen on this map in the past, it's been sort of just custom battles that have been played on this, sort of acted out as a siege battle, because this is technically a siege. We have the cliffside settlement over here. The last time I showed this map, however, it got awfully clustered and the frame rate was terrible, but hopefully now that I'm not using reshade, the added stability will mean that we can hopefully get into the guts of the fight a little bit more and see more of it. It's not foolproof, of course, because as we saw in the last Thranduil's Halls battle, there can still be crashing issues even without reshade, but I have noticed that, you know, it's definitely more stable than it is. I still feel as though there's always going to be problems with that from a sort of recording standpoint, but that's not something that many people are going to have to worry about, so it's not really a priority to fix. But yeah, I mean, hopefully this is going to be nice and stable, and this, I think it's been given the name SAGATH, which I'm sure I'm pronouncing that wrong. I'm not sure if that's like an actual place that exists in Middle-earth. I'm not really up on the Tolkien lore as much as you would expect, considering how long I've been doing this at this point. But it is going to be a 3v3 scenario, and that hopefully means that there's going to be a little bit less in terms of a creaking frame rate. And based on the deployment zones of the army out in front here of Harad, they're not all going to be clustered into 2 choke points, so that bodes quite well. We'll go through the attackers first of all, though, because for a start, one of the attackers is who sent me the scenario. But we have at the front, we have Met Grim, or Grimgore as he used to be called, playing as the Orcs of the Misty Mountains. So we've got some snow trolls over here. The Orcs tend to, in scenarios, be the attackers because of their bigger numbers. Obviously, makes it a little more cinematic from a. You know, it gives it a bit more of a theme for the most part. It's very rare that you'll see the Orcs on the defence, for example. You can see here some heavy goblin halberds as well. A good centre point for the Misty Mountains army in general. The AP phalanx that they offer, as well as the numbers, is a good thing, but do remember that they aren't the finest in terms of quality. As soon as their formation starts to crumble, they will die off very, very quickly indeed. And I think we've just got a full line of halberds over here, so probably I'm imagining that based on Harad's deployment zone actually extending into these trees, we might see some Haradrim cavalry here, which would explain very much why the Misty Mountains have gone for the pikes in front strategy. It definitely works better than it did in the movies. We've got the White Uruk Fearmongers over here, which are, I've called them sort of ghetto Fountain Guard in the past, and that is kind of accurate because they aren't as good as the Fountain Guard, but they do still offer very similar functionality. They are very strong halberdiers, and they will do a lot of damage in a sustained fight once they're in formation, and they make a very good sort of centerpiece to the Misty Mountains line when you're trying to grind your way through an area. And his line actually extends a long, long way, so he had a wide deployment zone, and all of his halberds are in a big, long line. He doesn't actually have too much else by the looks of things. He's got some units here and there. The Cave Troll Drum is obviously going to be very useful for keeping the goblins in line. We might obviously miss some of these units, because some of them may very well be hidden. The Misty Mountains do have a few units that can hide. Obviously the Heavy Goblin Spears as well, a very important part of the Misty Mountains army. Ever since they've been added, the AP on the spears is very, very useful. It essentially transforms them from the kind of fodder that the Morannon Guard are into a genuinely dangerous unit to encounter. Particularly, obviously, if your faction is a little bit more reliant on armor, the Misty Mountains can exploit this unit, because it isn't very expensive either, and also it can be used to assist with pushing as well, which obviously the Misty Mountains with their trolls can do very well. Then we've got the Heavy Goblin Archers, obviously slightly more heavily armoured variants of the standard Goblin Archers. There are less in the unit, but they are overall a little bit better individually. Whether or not the standard Goblin Archers are better or not, I personally think they are. I think the numbers in the standard Goblin Archers makes them better, and for less money as well, but obviously in a scenario that doesn't really matter too much. Grimgore was just assigned his army, so he didn't really have any input there. And that's going to be just about it, and just in behind him we have the army of the player who sent me this replay, and that's going to be Master Blaster. He is playing as Mordor. Naturally, he's got some fodder. It wouldn't be a scenario without plentiful units of fodder. And they're going to be here at the front, obviously terrible in melee, but they're just here to essentially absorb damage. Just in behind them, we have the Morannon Infantry, obviously, you know, the bread and butter unit for Mordor. Pretty decent, obviously. 1-to-1 they will still lose with a lot of other line infantry units, but their numbers are what gives them the edge, and obviously the Orcs in general are designed for overwhelming tactics more than any other type of faction. More Orc fodder going up there, more Morannon infantry in behind here, so he's got a pretty balanced army by the looks of things. I've got some Sauron's Will. Obviously the AP, very, very useful. Can inspire your line as well. Good to have just sort of in the mix for that extra bit of damage, which some of the other basic Mordor units can lack. Another option for that is the Orc Maulers. They may be low tier axemen, but the additional AP can be really useful. Less so against Harad in this situation, but I think the other two defending armies are Umbar, and AP is going to be very useful against Umbar indeed to get through their mightily high defense values. Then we've got some Morannon archers as well, obviously Orc archers in general designed for quantity rather than quality. And then we've got some Orc archers even more so designed for quantity over quality. And then over here we have the triumvirate of Mordor's elite footbound units. We have the Temple Guard, AP archers, and also not bad in melee. Just before we get into the hooded figures there, we will go to the Temple Executioners. I think they are still the strongest two-handed sword unit in the game, just by virtue of them being able to upgrade their armour. It pushes them over stuff like the Haven Guard, just by the ability of making them a little bit stronger. And then obviously we have the Nazgul as well, which if they're in a blob, it can be really difficult to uproot them. You know, definitely I think the defenders are going to have to be on the watch for the Nazgul, and maybe try and focus them down with archers, because you can still use the same tactics that you use against the Witches on the Nazgul. The Nazgul just don't have the very powerful ranged attack, but they are significantly tougher. And then we have the Troll Drummers back here, so more morale buffing, and then archers, and pretty much the same on this side. Yeah, Sauron's Will, so a symmetrical army. And finally, this army over here, which is off to the side, who are probably going to be advancing through the narrow canyon over here, bypassing probably most of the Haradrim forces. We have Isengard, played by Pasternak. We've got some Uruk-hai Raiders at the front. Obviously, they're worse than the Uruk-hai infantry, but they are more numerous and cheaper, so obviously it's a sort of more traditional Orc infantry unit, this, akin to stuff like the Heavy Goblin Infantry and the Angmar Marauders. Obviously they've got those Uruk-hai Scimitars as well, though. Numerous, though, and they're going to need those numbers in an attack like this. Half-Orc Spear Guard. The Half-Orc units in general are something which is often bypassed, I think, by a lot of Isengard players, mainly because the pikes can offer you all of the anti-cavalry potential you need from the front, and crossbows generally can also be used to zone out anti-cavalry. Now that may change with the coming changes to spears in 0.97, when spears are made a lot more dangerous to cavalry. That may make more mobile spears like this more attractive a proposition to bring as Isengard, but the Spear Guard is still pretty good in all the ways that standard spears are. You can use them to help push, and obviously still they are going to be a pretty good tar pit as well. The Dunlanding Berserkers, obviously an AP unit. They've got really nice, actually, attack units. They also have a bonus against cavalry, like all the Dunlanders do, to reflect their hatred of the Rohirrim, I suppose. But obviously, other than that, they are still horribly weak to arrows, and in a sustained fight, their lack of melee defense values as being a two-handed axe unit will start to come to the forefront. And then back here we've got some Dunlanding Veterans. Similar story here. The single-handed axes are not AP, but they are a little bit more attack-focused, and they are pretty cheap. I mean, it's a bit of a toss-up whether you want the more attack-focused Dunlanding Veterans or the more numerous Uruk-hai Raiders. For the most part, the Raiders are probably the safer choice, but the added attack of the Veterans can give something like your Isengard Uruk-hai Pike line something with a little bit more bite. It's an interesting question to ask. And then we've got the Uruk-hai Infantry with the armour upgrades, obviously strong. With the armour upgrades, they are just about pushing into the tier of infantry like the Guardians of Khand Dûm, the Castamir's Legion, and that sort of thing. I personally still think they're a little bit below that, but they are also a little bit cheaper than that, even with the armour upgrade, so it kind of fits. And obviously they make a very good centre to your Isengard line. Uruk-hai Reavers, so this is more basic Axemen units over here. And then we've got some Uruk-hai Archers as well, obviously very, very basic, very similar to the other Orc Archers. Isengard, for the most part, are usually reliant on their crossbows, though it looks like they don't have their crossbows this time, just some archers. But back here they do still have some of their stronger units. We have, I believe this is the General's unit, the Guards of Orthanc, the multiple HP spears. Strong, but not necessarily the most deadly from an attacking standpoint, but they are still difficult to bring down nonetheless. And then over here we have some Nazkai, which this might be the General actually, it's hard to tell, but obviously the Nazkai, basically the higher variant of the Uruk-hai Berserkers, very, very dangerous in melee. The sort of unit which can certainly hold a candle even to stuff like the Temple Executioners, so that is very much worth mentioning there, and the Uruk-hai Berserkers obviously. As soon as their hit points are expended, their lack of skill and their complete lack of armour makes them pretty vulnerable, but while their hit points are still up, they can do a lot of damage. But sort of it's definitely a unit which you need to use at the right time, otherwise they will end up dying. Now, over here, a lot of the Haradrim roster is hidden for the time being. We can just see a few units here at the front. We've got some Hashari over here, so obviously the melee assassins from Engsvitz, and some more Hashari actually. And then finally some Champions of Nafarat, which is going to be the Haradrim General's bodyguard. The rest of the Harad army I'm sure we will see as the Orcs advance forwards. They might have a few units back here as well. No, they don't actually. The Umbar armies we'll be able to see more of, but we've got Froggy over here with some Numenorian shield guards. So Umbar obviously making the solid stand within the settlement here, whereas Harad sort of sallying out a little bit, which makes sense. It plays to both factions' strengths. Umbar can hold for a long time. The Belagai Halberd is going to be very useful to deal with the vast majority of Orc forces. That AP going to be incredibly handy, as well as the Belagai Footmen over here, the spears, just to add more mass to the front line, because obviously the defenders often have to deal with mass pushes, although there really isn't much in the way of melee trolls or great shield units, so this might be a situation where they don't have to deal with that quite so much, but still the footmen will be useful to counteract against just the infantry doing that. Corsair pikes, we've seen them be effective in the past. For their price point, they are a very good cheap pike unit. We've also got the Harbingers of Castamere over here, obviously a dual wielding high tier unit, which is actually quite a rarity. They have a lot of skill, very difficult to bring down in a sustained fight. I would still worry for them against something like the Nazkai or Temple Executioners, but against the vast majority of the Orc armies, they will be able to sit quite comfortably and kill them off slowly but surely. We've got some Corsair pikemen over here, some Belagai archers. Obviously, Umbar's archers aren't the most damaging, which might actually work against them in this situation. They're not likely to take too much counterfire over time, but still, they are still quite tough. Belagai halberds, more Belagai footmen, a lot of Belagai units in general. Some Numenorian shield guard as well. Again, obviously, higher tier spear is going to be very useful for holding the line. Who is the other Umbar army, I wonder? It's going to be Eclipse 2500 of the Dark Cloud, and he's actually got some Corsair infantry with the armour upgrades. Obviously not really anything to write home about, very similar to the Orc infantry actually, only the armour upgrade should give them a slight edge, and obviously the backup of some of the other Umbar forces should help them there. Lots of Corsair infantry. A Catapult though, in a very good position. Some Abrazanim Nadu Bawi with the armour upgrade, obviously one of the best skirmish archers in the game. And then we've got some Naru Naru Sentinels. We saw how strong they can be in the past and in the future as well. I think a few of the battles, I'm not really sure in which the order I'm going to release these is, but the last one I recorded showed the Naru Naru Sentinels doing really well, although that might be after this one, so spoilers I guess. Belagai Footman, obviously he's clustered up his units, he's got some Corsair Savages as well, some AP, Abrazanim Nadu Tariq, more AP, Halberds, Nardu Zagar for the skill. Pretty good armies all around this. Nadu Bawib, more Nadu Bawib actually, and then at the back we've got some Castamir's Legion, more Sentinels, Royal Guards and Pikemen and the like. So I will make a little cut here because it's very likely that the attackers are going to take some time to get into position. Obviously it's nearly a 60k frames battle, so yeah, there's going to be a cut here, and I will rejoin when the battle has started in earnest. So interestingly enough actually, it looks as though the Haradrim are going to send their cavalry into the Isengard forces. You can see some Southron Lancers which revealed themselves very quickly, and they charged nicely into the front of those Uruk-hai raiders. And Isengard actually could be in a little bit of trouble here. They're going to need to get their half-orc spear guard out in front and get the Dunlanders in and around things with their anti-cavalry bonus. Because if they don't, even basic Lancers like this, the Southron Lancers, you saw how quickly they dealt damage to those Uruk-hai raiders there, and obviously the best thing that the attackers can leverage in this sort of scenario is their numbers. The Orcs have got a huge numbers advantage generally. Let's actually get in and around. This is a very dense tree line, so it's going to be quite difficult to follow this. But the Snow Trolls are quick, and this is actually probably the best example of seeing the Snow Trolls in action ever since I was told of their speed, because they are keeping up with the cavalry. That is something that you have to be aware of. Snow Trolls are incredibly fast, and as long as the player is on top of the micro, you can keep up even with fast moving cavalry. But now you can see that these Southron Lancers are still plugging away at these Uruk-hai infantrymen, although the Southron Lancers are only very basic Lancers, so their charge bonus is not as big as some more expensive cavalry, and their morale is not so great. So you can see that the Snow Trolls being in close proximity is causing them to become shaken very quickly. But we can see more Southron Lancers revealing themselves. There's some heavy Goblin Archers out here in front. It's very difficult. Oh, Blackback Berserkers, really? As I sort of struggle to see through the trees. This is where I'd love the feature from the newer Total Wars, where the leaves from the trees disappear when you get close. The Southron Lancers charged into the Blackback Berserkers there, but didn't really make too much of an impact. The hit points doing their job. The Southron Cavalry in behind the lines is now wavering. They're having a real difficult job shaking off the Snow Trolls. Meanwhile, what's going on over here? There is another unit of cavalry, I believe, that revealed itself. There's a Serpent Guard, which is obviously a stronger Lancer unit. The Serpent Guard will be able to do more damage off the charge, but the problem is a lot of the Misty Mountains units are halberds, so they need to be careful, and they do actually need to get into these trees and start charging while they're still here, because if they get bottled up in the settlement. As we saw the last time we saw this map, the runic cavalry was bottled up and couldn't do much, and I believe it was Tundra's Fox who he tried his best, but ultimately the cavalry was too constrained. The Southron Lancers charging in there to the Dunlanding units, which could be a bit of a mistake. Those Dunlanding Berserkers with their anti-cavalry bonus, and actually the Southron Lancers already broken and fighting to the death. Again, those Dunlanders, well used to fighting horsemen, and probably better armed and equipped horsemen than the Southron Lancers as well, with their wooden armour and basic lances. So yeah, Isengard, initially it looked pretty rough for them, but I think they have sort of weathered the worst of the storm. Meanwhile, we can see over here the Serpent Guard charging in as they charge right on through the Misty Mountains line, actually going for the heavy goblin infantry, so Grimgor did have some hidden heavy goblins in the trees. The Serpent Guard, you can see here, actually they're breaking already, and the Snow Trolls here have been a real godsend for the attackers as they advance through, because Lancers like this, in this sort of situation, with especially when you lose track of them in the trees and the attacking player is really on it, you can lose a lot of manpower just advancing forwards. But in this situation, the Snow Trolls have been able to sort of pick off the cavalry units one by one. There is a case for saying that perhaps Engsvit should have committed all of his cavalry at once, so the Snow Trolls had to pick and choose. But even so, the Snow Trolls have done a really good job. The speed of the Snow Trolls being showcased very nicely. And indeed, the Isengard player is going to be advancing through the trench, into the narrow trench into the settlement, whereas I would assume that the Mordor and Misty Mountains players will have to go through the wider section. Not that it makes too much of a difference. Isengard being on their own is kind of the biggest disadvantage here. See here, the Serpent Guard are probably going to try and pick off some of the Isengard units here. Now, the Uruk-hai Reavers are cavalry. Axemen, I should say, not cavalry. That was a nice charge, actually, so they're going to get a good amount of kills there off the charge. And at this point, with how badly the Serpent Guard were damaged, they routed again, actually. Unfortunate. So the Uruk-hai Reavers took some damage, but the damage they were able to give in return was enough to rout off that cavalry unit. And that may be the end of the Haradrim cavalry for the time being, although a handful of Southron Lancers and Serpent Guard are probably not what constitutes all of their army, so I would imagine we're probably going to see a few more units from Harad pop in out of nowhere. A few more Hashari, perhaps, of all the varieties. The mounted Hashari Rangers actually would be an interesting addition to this battle if he kept them hidden until near the end. As Isengard get ready to advance, but yeah, I think that's going to be the end of the Haradrim Lancers. Ultimately, that could be construed as a success here for the attackers. They didn't take as much damage as they probably feared. Harad and their Lancers can be very dangerous, very fast moving as well. And as we look here, we can see that there's some heavy goblin crossbows which were hidden as well. That's going to be a very important tool moving forward for Grimgor as the Misty Mountains continue to push forward. And I think the Misty Mountains army in particular can take an awful lot of credit for diffusing that situation. The composition of Grimgor certainly helped him there. All of the halberds made it very difficult for Engsvit to charge him from the front with all of his Haradrim Lancers. But certainly the Snow Trolls, I feel like, going to the aid of Isengard and making it really very difficult. There is a case for saying that maybe Engsvit should have tried to charge the Snow Trolls to death first. Off the charge, Trolls can take an awful lot of damage, particularly from 3 units of Lance Cavalry. But that is still risked, because the Trolls are still going to give it to the Cavalry in melee in a big way. As Mordor also move forward, the Orcs are all just sort of advancing through the trees. Pretty intimidating sight, a lot of Orcs as well. The Misty Mountains and Mordor, probably the two most, along with Angmar. Obviously those 3 Orc factions, the most quantity-heavy armies in the game. Isengard is a little bit different. A little bit more inspired by the Kingdoms of Men, perhaps, with all the Uruk-hai infantry, pikes and crossbows. Gives them a different feel. But obviously with units like the Uruk-hai Raiders here advancing forwards, they still certainly have that Orc identity. But perhaps you could say they have a little bit more of the Evil Men template about them. Isengard are a little bit in between all of that. Although they don't have their crossbows this time, they just have their archers, which are nothing to write home about, really. They're not quite the jokes they used to be. For a long time in 3rd Age, the Uruk-hai archers were practically useless. They do now have their purpose, as any low-tier archer does. As Isengard is slowly advancing through the canyon. I think I will actually make a little cut here, because it would appear at the very least, that the defenders are just sort of waiting for the attackers to advance into the settlement itself. So Pasternak's initial force is going to be engaged right away, essentially, here by some of Froggy's Belagire archers up here on the hill. He's going to be firing into the Uruk-hai Raiders, taking some nice damage there. I think, some of these Uruk-hai Raiders units have obviously taken the damage from those charges that Harad were able to get on. And Uruk-hai Raiders in general, as soon as their shields are pointed away from the Belagire archers, will fall pretty quickly, even with the Belagire archers. Very average amount of damage. And obviously there's very little that Isengard can do to sort of answer this. Again, there could be rules in play here, because Isengard have not pushed up their entire force, just an initial sort of probing attack force, which, again, if there are rules attributed to this scenario, I'm sure that Master Blaster will post them in the comment section below, or someone from the battle will. I mean, that's often how it works. If I do miss any potential rules and I criticise the players for just adhering to them without knowing it, then they will correct me in the comment section, and then I will appropriately mark that comment. So do keep on the lookout for that, because that might explain why some of these armies are sort of splitting up and some units are engaging and some aren't. But this initial probing force honestly is not a terrible idea anyway, because there's no way that Isengard are going to be able to break into the settlement all on their lonesome. If they try that, the Umbar Catapult and the Umbar Infantry will just hold them at bay pretty much indefinitely. They're going to need to wait for the two-pronged assault to come in. Particularly, the Misty Mountains Mordor front is going to be more difficult for the defenders to hold, simply because there's more men for them to try and deal with. Those Belagire archers just sort of peppering down the attackers as they move forward. Again, all of these just basic Uruk-hai Raiders though, so they won't be the biggest loss for Isengard. It wouldn't be the same thing, for example, if they were losing their Uruk-hai Infantry or their Uruk-hai Berserkers. The archers are now going to try and return fire, although the amount of damage they're going to do is incredibly limited. They certainly don't have the best of shots. And the Belagire archers are a fantastic archer for absorbing arrow fire. Those little bucklers they have give them a slight shield value, and their armour values are pretty good as well. It's one of the real strengths of Umbar. Obviously they will still take losses, but the Uruk-hai is certainly not in the best of positions here. You can see they've already taken some pretty substantial casualties as they've advanced into the field of fire over here. As you see over here, the Uruk-hai archers also spreading out wide. This could be a sort of a ploy from the attackers to try and get the defenders to waste their archer ammunition on stuff like the Uruk-hai archers, which not a bad idea, because the Uruk-hai archers honestly are not really the biggest asset the attackers have anyway in terms of skirmishes. That would certainly go to stuff like the Temple Guard and the Heavy Goblet Crossbowmen. If in the late game the defenders have nothing to answer those units, they will be in for a significant amount of trouble. We can see here that the attackers massing up their main force over here. A lot of martial might on display here from both Mordor and the Misty Mountains. A lot of numbers. A bit of quality laced in there as well. The Troll Drummers will keep a lot of these lower tier units in a row as well. Let's go see what's happening within the settlement. A lot by the looks of things. Some Narada Royal Guard that have moved a little bit further forward. Nadu Bawib. All of these Abrazani units are going to be particularly difficult to break down. All the variants of them are going to be difficult for the Orcs to deal with the kind of quality they're probably going to be sending in their first waves. Mace infantry in particular is going to be a little bit difficult to deal with for basic bitch orc units. Belagire archers actually taking damage from 2 Uruk-hai archer units, so it's a lot of fire they're taking. But of course this does work both ways as well. The Isengard forces will have basically no skirmish power once they've used up all their Uruk-hai archer ammunition. And then they will have to essentially advance into the defensive lines without any sort of skirmish backup, which, considering the Umbar infantry advantage here, is probably not great for them. Especially when you consider this front line over here, which already they're going to have to deal with Castamir's Legion, Abrazani Nadu Tariq, and Narduzagar. You can actually see over here the Uruk-hai archers were trying to get into a position to skirmish down the front line, but Umbar, wise to that, immediately chased them off. So a bit of a game of cat and mouse going on here between the initial Umbar defences and the Isengard advance. But this is to be expected. It's a long battle, this one. 60,000 frames is on the longer end of things. I think I've said before, the longest battle I was ever sent was 96,000 frames, which I didn't show because it was very, very strange. Now, though, there is going to be an engagement by the looks of things. The Uruk-hai archers getting close. Now the Uruk-hai Raiders are having to fight uphill into Castamir's Legion, so there is only going to be one victor in this particular battle, the Castamir's Legion. I've praised them numerous times now, both for their style and for their effectiveness. The Uruk-hai Raiders, while they may be great in number, they are not going to be particularly great in terms of skill, although I mean, Pasternak is doing technically the right thing here by trying to surround them, but unfortunately they are also probably going to take point-blank fire from the Balaguer archers. But it is interesting, actually, that the defenders have sent forward this solitary unit of Castemir's Legion when they could have just pushed up their entire line to here. They still would have had the relative protection of the cliffs. But yeah, I guess I can see why they did that. The Uruk-hai archers would have a shot onto the line, although all of these Umbar units, I should say, with the exception of the Narduzagar, do have shield values, and even the Narduzagar can include themselves in having good armor values. The Uruk-hai raiders already not enjoying this fight, taking many casualties. But they have managed to surround the Castemir's Legion. The Castemir's Legion have taken around 30 casualties already, just from these basic Uruk-hai units. So maybe a little bit of a misplay here. Again, it's only a very minor potential mistake, but the defenders in this sort of situation can scarcely afford mistakes, because the Haradrim army is probably smaller than the Umbar armies, and the numbers advantage is squarely in favour of the attackers, as is often the case. Now you can see that these Castemir's Legion are going to be well and truly surrounded, because we've also got Half-Orc Spear Guard moving forward, both units of them in fact. And you can see they are actually sort of forming up a formation. They are really boxing them in, although the Balaguer archers are also making a target of the Half-Orc Spear Guard. This is an interesting one. They are now trying to engage the front line, and needless to say, with the Spear Malice, this isn't going to go too well for them. The Abrazani are going to eat these guys for breakfast. Castemir's Legion very much surrounded. They should be able to fight their way out of this. They have taken some pretty notable losses at this point in time. But then it could be argued, with sort of an even army count, trading a unit of Castemir's Legion for 2.5 units of basic infantry might be worth it. We shall see. Isengard still only really have a skeleton crew that they've committed forwards. The rest of their army is still on the other side of the trench. Half-Orc Spearguard, you can see that some of the Half-Orc Spearguard already shaken. And the Abrazani obviously going to hold firm. The AP from the Nardu Tariq, the skill and attack values from the Narduzagar, both of which with their armor upgrades as well, so they're going to take even less damage in return from these basic spearmen. I can't imagine this is going to last too much longer. Balaguer archers, actually you can see over here the Uruk-hai archers getting into a position where they can shoot the Balaguer archers. But again, Froggy's just going to reposition his skirmishers, and I think Umbar will be quite happy with this overall. They may be a little bit concerned with how their Castemir's Legion have essentially been defeated, but their line is still holding, and ultimately Isengard are going to run out of resources long before the Umbar line is threatened. The Spear Guard obviously hideously outmatched in this sort of situation. Meanwhile, this is the way to deal with a unit of superior quality, though. The Castemir's Legion was surrounded. Pasternak did the right thing when he saw Froggy committed forward a unit, and he surrounded them with lower tier units, and they are just going to be overwhelmed at this point. There are too many Uruk-hai raiders here for the Castemir's Legion to fight their way out of this. Taking too many losses, obviously the penalty for being attacked in the back is pretty substantial. Being surrounded is not great. But the Castemir's Legion will pretty much fight to the death. Umbar's, when you get away from the Corsair tier units, Umbar's morale is really very good. The best of all the Evil Men factions, really. Brune have got some pretty nice morale values on their higher tier units as well, though. Meanwhile, we do have the potential beginnings of an engagement over here, as Mordor are going to advance up the other ramp into the settlement, and again it's going to be Froggy. This front line is also pretty nasty, however. Numenorian Shield Guard, there's some Balaguer footmen over here as well, and some Balaguer halberds. You can see that these Snaga skirmishers are moving forward. Now this is a very interesting move. The Nazgul are moving forward, going in for the initial engagement, and the Balaguer footmen immediately turn tail. The Nazgul obviously easily going to accept the charge for the Balaguer footmen, but it's the Snaga skirmishers, and again the attackers are doing the same thing. They're not allowing the defenders to settle into a line. They're going to have to advance forward if they want these units to be gone, and Master Blaster is front-loading this assault. He's sending forward a lot of his elite units immediately, and this could turn into a real problem here, because the Umbar line at this point either needs to pull back, which is dangerous in this sort of settlement when there are multiple routes to the top, or he needs to advance forwards, which obviously means then the attackers will probably commit forward a substantial amount of men more. The Corsair Blackguards immediately being targeted by the Temple Guard, although I actually don't think that's the best use of the Temple Guard's ammunition. Corsair Blackguards don't do particularly well under skirmish fire. You could easily just use Orc Archers for this purpose. So utilising the Temple Guard for this purpose, not really a big fan of it. And also some of these arrows are missing their mark as well. It's not the easiest shot, so overall maybe a bit of a waste. They are going down very quickly, the Corsair Blackguards, but I don't know. Wouldn't be my first choice for the use of the Temple Guard ammunition. Meanwhile, you can actually see over here the Casimir's Legion's still fighting on. They are now finally about to fall, but by the same token, we can see that the Narduzagar and the Nardu Tariq are starting to push outwards from their line at this point. I'm amazed actually that the Half-Orc Spearguard are still fighting. That's a point in their favour, certainly, but not for much longer. So this line of Froggies is going to hold up pretty easily. Even with the Uruk-hai archers here, the Umbarim skirmishers are almost certainly going to target them down and try and kill them off. I'd be interested to see if Umbar have got any hidden crossbow Corsairs. Balagaya Halberds the target, maybe the Corsair Savages, hard to say. Obviously Isengard do still have a lot of reserves, and in fact it looks as though, you can see over there, some Dunlending veterans have marched through the trench at this point and are getting ready to reinforce, although the first attack has been thrown off. What's going on over here? Morannon archers moving forward. This is a little bit more like it. To my mind, the Temple Guard, they would actually be, well, the shield value is still a bit of a problem, but they would be better off, I think, just attacking the front of this front line. Numenorian Shield Guard, you still do damage with that AP, and then obviously this front line would be pretty weak. It wouldn't be able to hold up long under the overwhelming force of both Mordor and the Misty Mountains advance if it was any weaker than it is currently. And this is the conundrum that Umbar have to face, because if they don't move forwards, the attackers are just going to keep doing this. They're going to continue to skirmish down. Now the Morannon archers are in place as well, and the Corsair Blackguards are not going to enjoy this all that much. They might be able to get a few volleys off though, and they are going to be able to shoot some volleys into the Temple Guard. And the Temple Guard are worthwhile going after, because even when they run out of ammunition, they're pretty strong in melee. So if you can get rid of them by any means, even if you can't kill the entire unit off, it's worthwhile. Temple Executioners have moved forward as well, so elite units here from Mordor. Snaga Skirmishers coming forward from the Misty Mountains. Now this is a double-edged sword. The attackers will be able to cause the defenders a good deal of pain with all of this skirmish power. Man, these Corsair Blackguards have been ripping through this Temple Guard, and this is obviously one of the dangers. Committing forward your elite units early, you know, the defenders are going to have all their skirmish power available to them as well, which means you're putting them in the firing line, and the Temple Guard have found that out all too painfully. The Corsair Blackguards, those javelins trump arrows for stopping power, even when it comes to the strongest of AP archers, like the Temple Guard, the Blackshot Dragon Slayers, and the Wardens of the North. Not good for them. The Nazgul have charged forward again, going into the Balagaya footmen, and the footmen will slowly but surely lose, but the Nazgul, there aren't very many of them, so they will actually take damage from this. It's a very gung-ho approach so far by the Mordor player in particular to send forward all of his elites. It could pay dividends, but in the late game we've often seen the attackers win a scenario based on the strength of them still having their elites available to them. But in this case, Mordor probably won't have that luxury. The Misty Mountains and Isengard might, however, so we shall see. This front line still perfectly fine. These Balagaya archers actually charged forward, presumably to try and pick off a unit of Uruk-hai archers that were getting a bit greedy with their shots, but now the Balagaya archers have been surrounded by Dunlending veterans, and this is a situation which they will love, taking on a unit of archers which is out of ammunition, and with their heightened attack values from those one-handed axes, they will win this fight very handily. So far I think Pasternak's done pretty well with his sort of lower end units, getting decent value off of them. The Half-Orc Spearguard maybe not, they charged into a fight they were hopelessly outmatched in. But I do think that Froggy has rather leapt him, in a way. Froggy has charged out individual units into the Hornet's Nest, basically, and it's been a rather simple task for Pasternak to go forth and then overwhelm them. But still, it's good to see the Dunlending veterans do well. Often they are basically used in the same way as fodder, and we don't really get to see them in action, but they do have their merits. They've got slightly higher attack values. The anti-cavalry bonus of all the Dunlending units, which I believe the veterans have as well. I know the two-handed axe unit has it, and the clansmen have got a heightened anti-cavalry bonus from standard spear militia, and I think the Dunlending veterans have got that too. to sort of reflect their hatred of the Rohirrim, which can make them a very useful unit. Isengard in general have got really nice anti-cavalry options. Uruk-hai Raiders shaken and exhausted, so they probably return from routing. I would just form up a defensive line over here to make sure these Balagar archers can't be reinforced. More veterans back there, some more archers. Pasternak playing the long game over here. Again, these Uruk-hai Raiders are just going to charge in and be immediately destroyed by the Abrazani Narduzagar. I would be very surprised if these raiders lasted any amount of time at all. Yeah, victory seems certain. The Abrazani are very well positioned in this kind of fight. The catapult's actually coming forward now from Eclipse 2500. That could be an interesting choice. The Dunlanding veterans are also going to join the front line, and with this amount of veterans, this might be enough to start to make the Abrazani sweat a little bit. They should still win, and they should still get a ton of kills, but they will probably start to take more and more losses. Because it's a lot of men they've got to hack their way through. And as I said, the veterans a little bit better on the attack, certainly than the Half-Orc Spear Guard, but also than the Uruk-hai Raiders. Meanwhile, we do actually have a more genuine engagement down here now, as Froggy has committed forward some Uruk-hai Pikemen, and Master Blaster has continued to send forward his elites. We've now got the Temple Executioners on the front line. Some of the Umbar skirmishers have now moved forwards as well. The Balagire archers attempting to shoot into the Mordor skirmishers, the Morannon archers, and based on terrain alone, it's not going to go too well for the Morannon archers, but they also have a perfect shot into the Corsair pikemen, and the Corsair pikemen are hideously under-equipped to deal with arrow fire. And there are yet more Mordor skirmishers coming forwards. But yeah, the attackers on this side very eager to try and utilise their skirmishers now, which is certainly a valid strategy, but so far Umbar have stood their ground, and Umbar's front line has not actually been tested earnestly in melee just yet. You know, the Númenórean Shield Guard are still standing firm, they've still got the backup of the Balagire Halberds, and if need be, they've still got some archer support as well, so this is the sort of line which could find itself in real trouble if a load of infantry comes forward, which now it's looking like maybe we will start to see that. The Temple Executioners, I think, are going to fall back, but we're going to see a fair amount of Morannon infantry backed up by the Morannon bows, and that could start to have an effect on how long Umbar are going to be able to hold this section of the city. I think Harad might be hidden over here. All of those Hashari, which in the late game could prove to be a bit of an issue. Still, these Balagar archers, I'm not convinced they've got the best firing position either. This big outcropping of rock is kind of getting in the way. There's a lot of routing going on over here. I would worry for the scarcity of manpower over here on the Umbar defence. These Morannon bows trying to shoot into the front here. The Balagar halberds will take a fair amount of damage from this. The Númenórean Shield Guard are even starting to drop. But I don't think Umbar can really do anything at this point. If they don't face the enemy at this point, the arrows will go into the backs, and that will negate the shield value, and they'll die even more quickly. So they do kind of need to just sit here and take this. Umbar could have prevented this by having more archers over here, though, so I don't really have the greatest deal of sympathy for the defenders at this point in time. If they really wanted to sort of save the lives of those men, they would have sent forward more Balagire archers and just sort of more skirmishers in general to hold that position. However, over here, we have a committal of more resources. Eclipse 2500 came to the aid of Froggy's Abrazani front line with a bunch of Balagire halberds, Corsair savages and Corsair infantry, which this is very swiftly going to turn this fight in Umbar's favour. Now they have the numbers and the quality advantage, and the Dunlanding veterans are starting to fall apart. And the way Pasternak's army is spread out, it means he can't reinforce his attacking force readily. He can't do it quickly enough to do that, so slowly but surely his army is going to be drained of its manpower. Some arrows are finding their mark into the side of this line from the Uruk-hai archers down on the low ground, but I don't know. While on the other side against the Misty Mountains of Mordor, things aren't really going so well for the defenders. Over here, I think they can afford to be pretty pleased with how things are going. Let's go and have a look at what's going on the other side. And now, Balagire footmen are breaking, Númenórean Shield Guard in trouble, and the problem here is, yeah, this is too little too late, I think, from Froggy. He sent forward his archers way, way too late to be of any real help. The halberdiers broke. The Numenorean Shield Guard are hopelessly outnumbered at this point. The Temple Executioners are on hand as well, so they have a quality disadvantage as well as a numbers one. Yeah, maybe a bit sloppy this, I have to say. I think you need to commit to something fully earlier than this. You either need to pull back, or you need to commit more resources to this choke point. One or the other. You can't sort of do half and half, because it never works. It's always a negative in a scenario, especially when you're on the defense. I've seen attackers make a similar mistake, just sort of feeding their men in, like Pasternak is kind of doing now. Although again, he is starting to send more units through the trench, and yeah, it could be said that sort of attrition is the right way to play that, while the more genuine progress is made over here, if that is indeed how the attackers coordinated. But over here, not great. Meanwhile, the Isengard forces have been entirely thrown off by the Umbar defence, Balagai, Halberds and the Abrazani. There's a lot of dead bodies over here, primarily Uruk-hai and Dunlanders, but also a fair amount of Castamir's Legion face down in the dirt. They still have that catapult over here, which could be a real problem. I mean, Pasternak certainly has a bit of a task on his hands, which is probably why he's taking it a little slower, trying to use attrition to his advantage. And actually Grimgor, noticing this, I think is going to send over some Halberds to help him, because they do still need to keep up an assault on both sides, the attackers. Otherwise the defenders can focus on one choke point in particular, and things can get pretty ugly for them. Of course, there are multiple routes up to the top. In fact, I think this is an area of the map we didn't actually see before. We only saw this road up to the palace over there, but there is a way up to here as well. Harbingers of Castamere up here. So the attackers will have to sort of go to multiple points on the field. See if that turns out to be a help or a hindrance to the defenders. I think it rather depends on the resources that the attackers have left towards the tail end of this fight. Still, Pasternak's trying to sort of skirmish with what he can. With those Uruk-hai archers, they're not likely to do huge amounts of damage to units like Abrazani. Getting a few kills though, and every little helps in this sort of scenario. The Abrazani are now also going to fall back behind protection of the cliffs. Well, Mordor pushing further into the settlement, and now this is an interesting setup over here. We've got Balagai footmen in shield wall, Numenorean shield guard and shield wall. We've got some Corsair pikemen backing them up, some Balagai archers as well, presumably still that have ammunition. They need more skirmish power over here on Bar, because the attackers have set the table. They've set the precedent, and they are going to use their skirmish power to just try and wear down the defences. And this is the problem with trying to rely too much on static defensive lines without the proper support in place. You know, they can just be skirmished down, and already we're going to be seeing that again. Numenorean Shield Guard in particular, when the arrows hit the Corsair pikemen, they will fall away very, very quickly. So it's really down to Froggy at this point in time. I'm very surprised actually that they had Froggy defend both front lines with his forces. We will have some Abrazani Nardus, got some Nardu Bawib as well from Eclipse 2500. This is what I've been waiting to see. They need, and some Naru Na'aru Royal Guard I think we saw in there as well. We do. So this is good. Now we have a much more genuine skirmish force to try and stem the tide of the attackers on this flank. It's about bloody time. Balagai archers started to fire in as well, so now the skirmish advantage should flip in favour of the defenders, which will probably force the attackers to fall back on some of their more traditional means of attacking, trying to push through with overwhelming numbers. But we shall see. Temple Guard already taking some damage. Around on archers trying to get some value off. The heavy goblin archers also firing in to the advancing Umbar troops. Chanting from the temple executioners, the cave troll drummers and the regular troll drummers, banging their drums as the forces of darkness array themselves. Meanwhile, another wave of assault up here. Isengard pushing forwards in a big way now, and actually Froggy pushing back behind this line has, again, this is a poorly constructed front line, I have to say. As soon as he pulled back, he wasn't covering the whole breadth or width of the choke point. And this has allowed the Abrazani to once again be enveloped, and this has been a story of this battle so far. Even on this side, where the defenders have had pretty decent engagements overall, Isengard have still been able to get good value out of their units. because of reasons like this, being able to surround, which in this sort of settlement and scenario is a cardinal sin almost, allowing this to happen, as the Uruk-hai infantry now much stronger than the Uruk-hai raiders as well, so this is certainly only going to go in one direction, which is a shame, because the Abrazani Nadu Tariq in particular would be a good sort of component to a defensive line to help deal with Uruk-hai infantry, and as it is, Froggy's front lines have not been particularly great this time around, which is surprising. Usually he's a reliable player. Uruk-hai infantry here on the front line with some Uruk-hai archers that are out of ammunition just acting as fodder here. Well, that was a very interesting shot because that was a lot of friendly fire that they just got. This section here, that was where the majority of the Umbar forces were, so if their plan was to try and bunch the Isengard units up to use the catapult, it's already gone awry. To be fair, they can scarcely miss, so they will do a lot of damage to these Uruk-hai units, and there are also arrows flying in here, so they will manage to destroy a lot of these Isengard units, so I guess those units were dead anyway, so it kind of evens itself out. Meanwhile, the Uruk-hai infantry doing really well here against the combination of Belagaya halberds and Corsair infantry. Corsair infantry obviously just basic, Uruk-hai infantry stronger than they are. Umbar need more from their defence, so more Corsair infantry being committed forward. The AP of the Corsair Savages is going to be fairly invaluable to stop Isengard's advance here, which so far has been pretty good, although again, not a fan of this layered defence. I've heard people, I know that some people think this sort of layering stuff is good, but I've never really noticed it to be that worthwhile. To my mind, it just allows the attackers to slowly but surely smash through one layer after the other. These Corsair Savages are needed on the front line now to deal damage to the Uruk-hai infantry now. And as it is, the defenders have been a little bit sloppy, in my opinion, in constructing these lines. Meanwhile, we do have some Belagaya archers. Presumably they did run out of ammunition, I would hope, anyway. They're trying to stop the advance of the Orc fodder and the heavy goblin infantry, so I think now, realising that they don't really have the skirmish advantage anymore, the attackers are going to start to fall back on tried and true methods of getting their way, and that's going to be attacking with overwhelming force. But there are a lot of good units over here. There's some Abrazani Narduzagar, there's the Nadu Bawib, who actually are not firing at the moment, which is strange. Numenorean Shield Guard, Corsair Pikemen, Belagaya Footman as well. Let's go and see what's happening over here. It's interesting that over here actually there's a sort of a wider choke point to cover, but Isengard may very well run out of manpower first. So it's kind of a blessing and a curse for both sides at this point. Whereas over on the other side, the Mordor and the Misty Mountains force with their far greater numbers have to go through much narrower choke points. Some of the Uruk-hai archers force their way through, but they're just going to be overwhelmed by the Corsairs in behind. But the Uruk-hai infantry proving their mettle here, doing really very, very well to get through an AP phalanx and the Belagaya halberds, and also the support of the very numerous Corsair infantry, showing their strength here, although they are still in a bit of trouble with the kind of force they're having to deal with. There's also the archers up on the higher ground. You can see up there the Abrazani firing into this position, and now the backup Corsair infantry and the Corsair Savages getting into melee. Some Abrazani Narduzagar also pushing in from the sides, which this should be the end of this wave of Isengard's assault, and I can't imagine they've got all that much manpower left, to be honest with you. They are sending forward more men now, but it's Uruk-hai Reavers who are unlikely to enjoy being in an environment where arrows are flying everywhere. Very similar to the Corsair Savages on the other side of things, although they actually do have some armour value, whereas the Corsair Savages, I believe, have literally zero armour. Even so, their sort of really trashy leather armour is not going to help them too much here. That's a nice hit there, hitting pretty much only Isengard forces, so a good hit there from the catapult. There's also fire arrows coming in, so Umbar at this point know what they want. They want those morale shocks, they want to deal with Isengard here and now. Let's go and see what's happening over on the other side, shall we? Ah yes, here we go. A classic scenario mosh pit. Not quite to the point where I have to zoom out just yet, which is actually nice. We've got a combination of Corsair Pikemen and Abrazani Narduzagar facing off against heavy Goblin Infantry, and I believe it says defeat seems certain, and I assume that's because of the archer support. A lot of Orc archers moving forward, all of these low tier arrows being utilised. The Abrazani now returning fire, which is good to see. With fire arrows as well, although I don't think they're likely to break the Orcs when they're in this number, especially with the troll drummers in close proximity. So you'd probably be better off just going for the regular ammunition. But this choke point should hold for longer, because it's more difficult for the attackers to use their archers. It's the angle is not as easy. They have to go over the heads of their own men, but also the support of the defending skirmishers is going to make this a little bit more difficult for the attackers. And you can see back there some Naru Royal Guard. What else? There was a unit there that was just hidden. That might have been crossbow Corsairs, which would be a real boon over there, those AP missiles. What is going on here? Uruk-hai Reaver's victory seems certain, but that is because they are only really fighting Corsair infantry on the front line. The Savages have sort of pulled themselves off the front line. Some Corsair infantry have pushed far too far forwards and are immediately being accosted by Uruk-hai Reavers, and now you can see that the Goblin support is on the way. Heavy Goblin Halberds are finding their way up here. There's also some drummers over there. We've got the troll drummers from Mordor. So now all of the attackers starting to work in tandem, supporting Pasternak a little bit with his endeavours over on this front line. Corsair Savages. They will be useful against a lot of these low tier units, but they're not engaged just yet. But with the numbers from the Heavy Goblin Halberds, the attackers can afford to sustain this assault for longer. And they should be able to kill off a fair amount of this Corsair infantry as well, which, well, I say that, those Heavy Goblin Halberds took a direct catapult shot and are already routing, and that was basically a full unit of them. They will come back, of course, but units do take penalties when they rout and come back, and that's a real shame. That's a real boon for the defenders. They are going to enjoy seeing all those Halberds running for the hills. All of the reinforcements, as soon as they arrived, immediately broke. Those trolls need to be closer if they want their morale buffing to having any real effect, and that's going to be that's going to completely rout the assault from Isengard. So once again, the assault on this portion of the settlement has been thrown off. Umbar doing very, very well for themselves. That catapult proving to be a real thorn in the attacker's side. Meanwhile, over here, this dense defence over here is also in favour of the defenders for the time being. Those are javelins raining down on the Heavy Goblin Halberd's head from this up here. Yes, it is. So we've got some Corsair Blackguards who immediately hid as soon as I went up there, but they've done some nice damage to the Heavy Goblin Halberds. The Sauron's will, and again, this is a problem for the attackers. They need to find some way of getting through here, but it's not easy when you're dealing with a choke point like this, especially when you're up against Umbar, who've got a lot of options for holding the line. And to be honest, the attackers don't really have the most pushing units. They've got snow trolls and they've got some spears, but that's not really going to be enough here. They certainly need to do more damage to this front line than they have at the moment. And again, when the time is right, I'm sure we will see a bit of a mass push. What's going on here? Frontline re-engaging. We've got some Orc fodder coming over here from Mordor. Again, not exactly the last word in terms of quality. They're not going to be as hideously outmatched as they would normally be, because they are only up against Corsair infantry. But they are still going to die, obviously. They will still lose 1-to-1, although with the numbers and the support of those axes, may very well go in favour of the attackers here. The problem's going to be that catapult. As soon as the catapult shoots another direct hit, you can see here, the Heavy Goblin Halberds have come back. This time maybe they'll get into melee before the catapult sends them running for the hills. But Umbar still have plentiful reinforcements over here, some good units as well. The Nardu Bawib, which are out of ammunition at this point, I believe. But they make good makeshift line infantry, especially when the opponents are just sort of the basic Orc units. They should be just fine. We are now past the halfway point in this battle though, so we'll have a look at the percentage of kills. And interestingly enough, the attackers are ahead at this point in time. But again, as this is a 3v3 rather than a 4v3 or even a 5v3, I would find it unlikely that the attackers will pull it back quite so significantly in the late game. It's still likely, but the defenders can turn this around. And also remember that the attackers have also sent forward a lot of their higher tier assets already. The Temple Guard are basically gone. The Nazgul and the Temple Executioners have been utilised in a fashion, so we'll see. Umbar, and obviously we still haven't seen Harad yet. Harad is still lurking in the shadows somewhere. Those Hashari, the champions of Nafarat, as well, could be a real problem for the Orcs to deal with if they don't have the right tools come the end of the battle. Speaking of which, the Temple Executioners are on the front line once again. I'm not sure whether they will actually enjoy fighting through here. There's a lot of spears, a lot of polearms. It's going to be a real grind to get through. Still entirely possible they manage it, of course, but could be tricky. A lot of these Orc archers, looks like Mordor are starting to expend their skirmish power. Now at this point you can see the snow trolls from Grib charging forward. So with the Temple Executioners on the front line, I think this is where the attackers feel as though they can start to put some real pressure on this defensive position. So those Orc archers still actually do have ammunition. Like 2 units of snow trolls? Might be. No, it's just a single unit, right? Here come the snow trolls though. This is going to be a good counter to stuff like the Corsair pikemen. They're going to do a lot of damage. They will probably take a lot of damage from this as well, to be fair. And they're actually just pulling through, which that will create gaps in and of itself. That might be 2 units of snow trolls, actually. So that might explain why it was so difficult for the cavalry to avoid all of the snow trolls early on. My bad. This is obviously going to have a pretty bad effect on Umbar's front line. It will also stop the Abrazani Nadubawi from firing, which should, in theory, give the skirmish advantage back to the attackers over on this front line. We shall see how this goes. There are some Sauron's Wool on the front line, so that's some additional AP. There's still a thick front line they've got going on over here, though, so it's going to be a tricky proposition to get it out of the way fully. Having a look just over here, you can see, obviously, the Abrazanim, I've said before, they make good makeshift line infantry, but when they're up against something like trolls, it can be a real problem for them. Here come the Abrazani Nadi Tariq, which are an AP unit. I'm not sure whether that's what's needed over here. But the defenders are intent on saving this front line, although at this point I think it might actually be... the damage might already be done. You can see that heavy goblin spears are coming in now as well. And they are pushing. They're in shield wall, trying to push through. So even with the lack of stuff like cave trolls or one of the great shield units, the attackers are still using this tactic, which obviously they're well within their rights to do. Trying to grind down against that Umbar front line would have been rather fruitless. And as soon as they dealt enough damage, they sent forward the snow trolls, and this is probably going to be the end of this defense over here. And the Abrazanim Nadu Tariq, the problem with them is they have a low base attack value. They are an AP mace unit. They have a very specific purpose, and that purpose is not burning down the hit points of trolls very quickly. You know, trolls are going to really enjoy fighting Nadu Tariq, I would think. Just as a sort of case study, for example, we have a single, well, 2 Abrazani Nadu Tariq, one of which was just destroyed, and then the other one just ignored. But yeah, the snow troll's definitely doing the damage there. Let's see what's going on over on this front line. As things continue to get a little bit more hectic, you can see the trolls are now a little bit further forwards. Now deploying their morale buffs, which is going to be a bit of a problem for Umbar, because even though none of these units are of particularly high quality, there are a lot of them, and honestly the Umbar front line is not of particularly high quality. Balagaya Footman is basically the highest tier unit they have over here. Now is the time where I maybe want to just zoom out just a little bit. But yeah, Corsair Savages don't really have the most staying power, and they are the linchpin of this defensive line at this point in time. Those Narduzagar might want to get in there if they want to save this front line, and they probably do, because as soon as this front line breaks, they're not going to be able to get this catapult out of here. Naruna Aru Sentinels are being committed forward as well. Now the Narduzagar are getting in there. Again, I'm not a big fan of waiting until your line is basically on the verge of collapse before sending in reinforcements. I feel that no one will ever convince me that that is a good idea. That is a nice shot there, though. Minimal friendly fire. And even with the morale buffs, the Orc Maulers did not like that at all. Became shaken. And that might be sufficient to keep this Umbar front line fighting. Another nice hit there. These Orc Maulers really not enjoying this. And this is probably the sort of thing which is going to start a rout fairly soon. Orc fodder are getting out of here. I mean, the catapult is in an ideal position here. It really can't miss. Look at that, those Orc Maulers running for the hills. So still, the defender's doing a good job over here, but what do I see in the distance? It's Moran on infantry. So as you can see, this defensive line has crumbled. The Snow Trolls did their damage, and now they're pushing into the upper section of the settlement with some of their units, but they're also sending reinforcements over to attack the rear of this Umbar line over here. And this is where some reorganisation is needed, which Umbar have already begun to their credit. They put a unit of Naru Na'aru Sentinels to cover this way in, so the catapult is still going to be safe. But it's going to be a stretch at this point. We'll see. I mean, the Narduzagar are here. Well, I hope Umbar at the very least are going to set up a defensive line to deal with the reinforcements that are inevitably going to come their way. The Naru Na'aru Sentinels were pointing the right way, but they have since abandoned such things. Abrazani Nadibar with firing, the Naru Na'aru Royal Guard firing, so still a good amount of skirmish power for Umbar over in this section of the city. We'll see if this front line can hold up under continued pressure. More Misty Mountains forces. There's still a lot of the Isengard forces on the other side of the trench, which would include stuff like the Guards of Orthanc and the Nazkai. We'll see if we see them soon in this battle. Hashari Stalkers. It's possible that they've already used their ammunition. If they haven't, then Exvit should be ashamed of himself for wasting them. Rangers are not the sort of thing you want to commit lightly. I would assume that they have used their ammunition, because they are essentially being used as a rearguard action while Umbar get their next defence in place. They do have some crossbow Corsairs as well, so again this acts as something to bunch the enemy up. The Temple Executioners are still alive, despite having been active since basically the first melee engagements on this side of the settlement. They are starting to lose their manpower a little bit though, and now with crossbow bolts also flying in here, that's probably not the best thing for them. Again, I'm really not a fan of this layering business. They need to get the Nadu Tariq and the Corsair Pikemen fighting in tandem. Their strengths will work really nicely together. They cannot afford to send them in one by one. That's a hideous mistake. Arrows and bolts just flying back and forth. To be fair, the attackers only have so much manpower. Will the defenders be able to withstand this? Will the attackers run out of steam? Here we can see the champions of Nafrat from Harad. There goes the Mordor General, those crossbow bolts doing the damage. And again, good. I was worried these Nadu Tariq were just going to be sent forward on their own. They are going to receive support, however, from the Corsair Pikemen. So a combination of AP and Pike Phalanx going to be useful here for keeping the Orcs at bay, particularly against stuff like heavy Goblin infantry, not so much the spears, but the heavy Goblin infantry are really going to struggle to make inroads against this sort of defence. The defenders are running out of manpower as well at this point though. If we have a look, it has flipped in favour of the defenders by a single percentage point. We shall see if the traditional thing happens and the attackers can swing it in the late game. And actually it looks as though Umbar counter-attacking and really just forcing the Orcs out of the settlement completely on this side of things. Orc Maulers, who presumably came back from routing, although to be fair, well, Abrazani Corsair Savages as well. It's extremely unlikely these Orc Maulers are going to put up too much more resistance. And yeah, this attack over here has not gone too well. Pasternak's been able to get some decent value off some of his low tier units, but as soon as he committed forward, even with the support of his allies, Umbar's main defence held out very, very well. The catapult is retreating, so I think at this point the defenders are thinking about sort of retreating to their final stand areas. As soon as this defence over here falls, which I think eventually it probably will, even with these reinforcements like Balagai Halberds, Champions of Nafarat, Castamir's Legion, it's very probable that eventually the attackers will have what it takes to break them down. Although the Champions of Nafarat are a tough cookie, and the Temple Executioners are still taking pretty horrendous amounts of damage. Let's hope it doesn't crash, but these crossbow Corsairs have been doing damage. They put in some work. Very much the definition of a glass cannon. They've got hideous survivability, but the damage they can deal, especially in a situation like this, is very substantial. Eclipse pulling back his Castamir's Rangers. Is he going to try and get into position on this hill and start firing into this blob? I mean, you'll scarcely find a better blob. You may as well dump all of your ammunition into it now. Try and rob the attackers of all of this manpower, because that is the primary advantage you have in a scenario traditionally when you're attacking with the orcs. As all the orc banners still fly high. But over here, I'm actually not sure whether we will get to see the very highest peaks of the settlement, because Pasternak is now sending forward his units, but the attackers were completely forced out of the settlement over on this side. You can see some Corsair pikemen are routing all over the place. But at this point, Uruk-hai Berserkers, Nazkai, some more Uruk-hai infantry. This is basically all Pasternak has left. This would be his final wave as the frame rate dips for some reason there. That was interesting. But this is going to be sort of Isengard's final hurrah. It's full of very strong units, to be fair, and may very well be enough to finally unseat Umbar in this section of the city. So we might see the final stand. Hard to tell. What do Mordor have left in reserve? And here we can see some Hashari which have revealed themselves. There's only 33 of them, but they could be enough to slow down a unit like the White Uruk Fearmongers, which would, when they get on the front line, could be a bit of a problem for the defenders. So it's good to see Harad did engage in some more sneaky behaviour with their assassins. Champions of Nafrat obviously just being used as a bludgeon, as they often are. What's going on over here? Those are the Troll Drummers, which are here on the front line. Naruna Ira Royal Guard being pulled back. Ooh, goodness me. That catapult getting into a perfect position. Let's go and see it from the perspective of the catapult. Again, it's honestly pretty difficult for them to miss, and the morale shocks here could be very significant. The catapult probably doesn't have that much ammunition left, but the more kills it can get at this point, the better it's going to be. That is again another nasty salvo. And again, they do still have the Naryn Ira Royal Guard. They don't have anything special to their arrows, just sort of basic damage, but the more skirmish power they can just pour into this area, the less manpower the attackers are going to have. Again, getting in close to this sort of mess is the sort of thing which will crash the game, even without Riche. These Castamir's Rangers also using their body piercing, so this has been a devastating defensive position that they have taken up. This has been bad for the attackers. This may be the sort of section within the battle which decides it. We shall see. What's going on over here? Looks as though we are going to begin to see Isengard. Isengard are sorely needed. Isengard need to start... Well, they need to try and shut down that catapult, really, but they need to offer another way into the city for the attackers, because that one choke point has gone horribly for them so far. Got some Nazkai. Have they got any units which returned from routing? Just any dregs in addition to these final few units? Doesn't look like it. It's going to be a challenge, this. I mean, Isengard have got some strong units, but Umbar still have some good units in reserve as well. Have a look back here. We've still got some Belagaya footmen, but it's stuff like the Naryn Aru Sentinels, which, provided the Umbarim take up a good position in a choke point, the Naryn Aru Sentinels will be able to hold. But yeah, we're not going to see that Palace final stand, I don't think. Down here, though, Corsair Savages on the front line. The Crossbow Corsairs also ran out of ammo and have now been committed to the front line as well, just more meat for the grinder. The Champions of Nafrat still reasonably healthy, despite having been in that mess. The Nazgul, obviously they lost their general, but they might still be in here somewhere. Obviously, it's impossible to keep track of the Nazgul, even more so than the Witchers, because at least with the Witchers people usually try to get them to stand on the edge of a fight and you can pick them out, but with the Nazgul they're right in the thick of it. Some Blackback Mountain Berserkers over there, so the Misty Mountains still have a strong unit available to them. What's going on down here? Hashari Stalkers, Hashari. So Harad actually chasing after Isengard's units now. These Moranon Archers being finished off by the melee Hashari. And the Hashari Stalkers obviously are the Ranger variant. They might still have ammunition, it's hard to tell. Again, there's arrows flying everywhere. Very easy to miss units like this. But the Hashari Stalkers obviously not terrible in melee either, but if they still have ammunition, it could be a real problem for Isengard, particularly when it comes to units like their Uruk-hai Berserkers. Very dangerous in melee, of course, but not so great when it comes to taking arrow fire. And Isengard filtering in here. This Uruk-hai infantry, though, is unlikely to make too much progress against a line as thick as this. The Naryn Aru Sentinels are here also. And now Eclipse's catapult is also backing up this front line. Pasternak's bane in this battle so far. They've got some Naru Na'aru Royal Guard firing basically at point blank. The Guards of Orthanc are joining the front line. But again, they're not really designed with damage in mind. So this will probably make this fight last longer than it otherwise would, but I still don't believe they're going to break through this line, and also the catapult's right here. Wait a minute. Uruk-hai infantry? Are they going to go for that unit, or are they going to try and hit the front line? They are going to go for that Uruk-hai infantry, and a nice hit at that. 2 nice hits. The catapult's already paid for itself, so anything they get from here on out is a bonus. Meanwhile, the Uruk-hai Berserkers and the Nazkai going another way, trying to relieve the pressure on their allies over here, although their army lies in ruins at this point, so I'm not sure whether it has come fast enough. But the Nazkai and the Uruk-hai Berserkers getting in here. This Corsair Pike unit not likely to hold them up for much longer. The Snaga skirmish, actually the Misty Mountains of Mordor have managed to break through here eventually. The Blackback Berserkers are here. The Naru Na'aru Royal Guard are no slouches in melee, but they're not going to be a match for the Blackback Berserkers. They do have some Castamir's Rangers to help. But again, time will tell whether that will prove to be decisive or not. Snaga skirmishers also getting in here to attack the Corsair Pikemen in the back. Isengard doing well for themselves here. Meanwhile, what's going on back down here? Uruk-hai infantry taking on the Hashari. They actually turned around, and this unit of Hashari seemed to have taken damage beforehand, so the superior numbers of the Uruk-hai standing them in good stead here. Can the Hashari Stalkers get into position quickly enough to finish this unit of infantry off? Based on how they are positioning themselves, I would assume they do in fact still have ammunition, because the Uruk-hai infantry are immediately beelining for them. But with the support of what's left of the melee Hashari, I don't think the Uruk-hai infantry would win this fight. So it's not really the end of days. And here you can see some of the body-piercing projectiles going into the back of this attacking line and sending some of these units routing, albeit just crossbows that are out of ammunition, but still, every little helps. It's really this area over here now that the defenders are placing their faith in. It's not like all the defending units are particularly elite either. Corsair Savages and the like. The Champions of Nafrat being used as a rearguard action again, and here comes the Goblin King Bodyguard, another unit I missed early on that must have been hidden. Actually, that can't be true because it's the General, so I must have just been... Or is it the General? Yes, it is. So I must have just been blind. There goes the Harad General in the hands of the Blackback Berserkers. Champions of Nafrat were really outmatched in that situation. It was always going to be a difficult ask for them to win that. Goblin King Bodyguard and the Champion and the Blackback Mountain Berserkers. So the Misty Mountains still have their elites, as do Isengard. Mordor may have expended theirs somewhat. But the defenders still have 2 positions, but I think being divided here is honestly going to work against the defenders. This palace/mosque up here. The Castamir's Rangers all on their lonesome are not going to be enough. There is a unit in here, mind you. Well, actually, there's several units in here. Naru Na'aru Sentinels and Royal Guard. That's going to be difficult for them to break through, honestly, the attackers, but they should manage it with all of their elites. Meanwhile, the other stand goes up to the other palace/mosque up the cliffside path over here. The catapult still has ammo, which that's bad news for the attackers. It's really been a real thorn in the attackers' side so far. And a nice hit here on the Goblin King's Bodyguard and Blackback Mountain Berserkers could be just what the Doctor ordered, but they actually shoot long. They do hit some more Blackback Berserkers, mind you. Is that one going to hit? Nope. But needless to say, this is a fight in which the Corsair Savages are fairly outmatched. So this is going to be more essentially free kills for the attackers as they continue to move forwards. Here come the Cave Troll Drummers. Not many of them left, actually. The attackers are still behind, but they have elites. Abrazani Nadu Bawid moving in to try and help hold the line, but the Blackback Berserkers are just going to mulch their way through units like this. The catapult's trying to get behind the Naru Na'aru Royal Guard, who are actually reloading. The Nadu Bawib and the Sentinels getting out of there. Guards of Orthanc and the Uruk-hai, so actually I think... Yeah, I mean, I think the Hashari were ganged up on a little bit here by the Isengard forces. So it was a decent attempt by Enxlitz to use those Rangers to try and get him behind. But ultimately I don't think it panned out unless this is them over here. Yes, it is. So he has actually managed to save his Rangers. He's trying to get them into a different position. We'll see if that pans out. Meanwhile, this front line here, made up of just Balagaya footmen and the dregs of a unit of Corsair savages. Eventually Isengard is going to break through here. Again, they've still got their Naru Sentinels alive though, and it's such a strong pike unit, such a strong basis for your line. What I would worry about is they don't have much in the way of damage dealers. They should still have their Harbingers of Castamere somewhere. But I'm not sure whether that's going to be enough to really turn the tide of this battle. Nadu Bawib trying to get out of there. Form up a more comprehensive line elsewhere. Snaga. Blackback Berserkers. Meanwhile, there are some Harbingers of Castamere in here, as well as some Sentinels and some Royal Guard. Definitely not the easiest units to break down. You can also see in here, if we can zoom in properly, Al-Farazon, at least one of them, is hanging out. As a matter of fact, it looks as though the attackers have decided to break off from this position over here, or at least wait. The Heavy Goblin crossbows, they have ammunition, I think they've still got their crossbows out, but they have a very limited... I think this door would be hollow, so I think they could probably shoot through that, but then the defenders could just sort of go either side of the door, so... Not easy. What's going on here? Again, this is layering, and layering will never cease to make me despair. You cannot convince me that this is a good idea. These Abrazani Nadu Bawib are basically going to die for very little, unless it's just for the sole purpose of buying time for this catapult, in which case maybe. But these Nadu Bawib are not going to last all that long against Uruk-hai Berserkers. There's, I think, Blackback Berserkers in here still. Yes, there are. Are the Goblin King bodyguards still in here, or is the Misty Mountains player saving his general for another time? It's hard to say. Meanwhile, we do have these Hashari Stalkers firing into these units of Uruk-hai infantry, trying to deal damage where they can. Again, like I said, they're no slouches in melee, certainly. What are they going for? The Uruk-hai infantry now, though, has got the Hashari Stalkers in their sights. They can probably get one more volley off before they are caught in melee. But unfortunately for them, it wasn't really a very comprehensive volley. They will be able to slither away, though. The Rangers are very quick, provided Engsvitz force paths them away, which he will. But the Uruk-hai infantry, with their armour upgrade, with their shields, managing to withstand those body-piercing projectiles. Obviously lower base damage. The body-piercing does come at a price, but yeah, these Nadu Bawib were just rolled over there by the elites from the Misty Mountains. And Isengard, the Berserkers do count. This position over here, very interesting. They need to set up a comprehensive defence here, I think. They need to just get all of their infantry into one position now, and hope that the catapult can do the damage. The Naru Sentinels will form up a good ground, but again, I've said it so many times this battle, I really do not like sort of putting a unit here and putting a unit here, because layering the defence, it just doesn't work. Because I've likened it to a clenched fist, when the attackers just sort of mass up all their units and they just bash through defences like this. It's happened time and time again, and I'm very surprised that people still do stuff like this. But hey, there is something to be said for leaving stuff in reserve, but you need to be a little bit more decisive with what you commit and when, in my opinion. But it looks as though Froggy is still just sort of waiting for the time when he gets to engage. And there are still some Harbingers up here as well, up on this, essentially the summit of the settlement. Even if the summit is technically that thing up there. Harbingers also chanting. Bit of an encampment over here as well. It's a neat settlement, this. I really do like this one. Sort of built into the cliffside. Sort of several little pathways as well. Meanwhile, what's going on here? Catapult just sort of waiting. We are now approaching the final phase of this battle, essentially. Who's your money on at this point in time? It's very even at this point. The attackers at this point only 1 percentage point behind. But at this point the defenders do have primarily elite units. You know, the Abrazani Nadu Bawib are really their weakest melee unit. We shall see. Naru Royal Guard, obviously the Sentinels, the Harbingers in particular, are going to be a match for a lot of the elite Orc units. You can see the they're very distinctive. I don't really know what to call this weapon. It's sort of a cross between an axe and a greatsword, I suppose, with those points on the end. More of an axe more than anything, I suppose. But the Berserkers here, meanwhile, what's that? It was the Hashari Stalkers, who are still making a nuisance of themselves, still just sort of trailing behind all of these units after them. But I think this is going to be the end, because these heavy Goblin Archers are going to be able to shoot them point blank. And this might be the end of what Engsvitz can do to help his allies at this point, so Harad probably going to be the end for them. And it's going to be down to Umbar as to whether or not this settlement is going to be defended. It would appear. Now we see the first engagements, and that's some nice hits there. That's a lot of crispy blackbacks. That's probably the only volleys they're going to be able to get off, though. With the assistance of the Troll Drummers, will they be able to get through? The Nadu Barweeb are not great, but the Sentinels, you would imagine, should be able to keep the blackbacks at range, but the support of the Trolls might be fairly significant in this sort of situation. Here come the Uruk-hai Berserkers. This is another opportunity for the Catapult to do its thing, because the Berserkers are another unit which are going to be capable of dishing out a lot of damage very, very quickly. Victory seems certain. The Naru Sentinels are fighting. Yeah, you would imagine that this Catapult's going to be able to hit these Uruk-hai. Some friendly fire here would be a devastating blow for Umbar. Go on, Catapult, you know you want to do it. You know you want to get a perfect hit. Give the defenders some hope in this situation. Are they going to do it? It might be that they initially started to fire and now their sight line is blocked. Isengard have still got their elites though. They may have taken a beating early on, but Isengard's elites at this point in the game could be the thing which separates victory and defeat. Naru Royal Guard, do they still have ammo? I don't think they do. They've just got their spears out. If that's the case, they should probably just be committed down here with the Harbingers. This layered defence, I'm still not a fan of it. Although, to be fair, there goes the Misty Mountains General. With only really elites left, though. Not convinced that's going to be a huge deal. Meanwhile, interestingly enough, Umbar actually broke cover and advanced outwards. With the support of these Castamir's Rangers, this could be the sort of bold move which ends up winning them the game. The Harbingers of Castamir fighting side by side with the Naru Royal Guard. And the Sentinels, they are sending these units packing. The White Uruk Fearmongers routing. So this is going to be enough actually to bottle the attackers up into one location. This could be it. I think the defenders might just be able to pull this out. What is going on here? They're going to try and set up a rear guard to stop Froggy's advance, but a single unit of Uruk-hai infantry won't last long against Harbingers. This has sort of hastened the need for this line to be something of a success for the attackers, and they have managed to force their way into the Naru Sentinels, and they're going to start to fall apart very quickly now. So again, this is why I don't like a layered defence, because these Naru Royal Guard could have been there from the start, and they could have prevented this. Instead, they were too far behind, and they could end up losing this line because of it. And if they end up losing the battle, I would also stick my neck out and say that this right here could be the reason. If the defenders go on to lose this, it's because Eclipse's army was not organised in a fashion where he had more distinctive lines. Instead, it was just one line after one unit forming up one line, then another unit, and it just doesn't work. I've never seen it work, especially not in a scenario when the attackers have got so much in terms of resources and manpower they can just keep throwing at you. Any casualties you do inflict are just recouped by them overwhelming your unit too quickly. And yeah, it's a real shame as well, because the Naru Sentinels are a really, really strong unit. Now they're going to be butchered by Nazkai, Blackbacks, Guards of Orthanc, Uruk-hai Berserkers. Even the Snaga are probably going to get a few kills here. The Catapult's also been dealt with. But now we will see, obviously, the Catapult crew, the Naru Royal Guard, and the Harbingers. Finally, hopefully, Eclipse is going to form a unified line with what very little he has left. But now the necessity for Froggy here is that he gets a shift on. He needs to be very swift. He can't afford to dilly-dally. Engsich actually still does have some Hashari Stalkers, interestingly enough. What happened to his Harbingers? Oh, no, 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 no. Please. Please tell me this isn't the case. They're still stuck on a unit of blackbacks. No bueno. Castamir's Rangers and Nyrun Arrow Sentinels should be enough to get these Uruk-hai infantry out of the way. And with the support, honestly, of the Hashari Stalkers, even as damaged as they are, that is still some range firepower, and it's still body-piercing range firepower. Here comes the Horde. There goes Froggy's general. The blackbacks are really proving their mettle in melee. I've got to be honest, actually, I have been consistently disappointed with the Harbingers of Castamere. You'd think, looking at them, that they're really strong, but they generally don't seem to be as good as other units of a similar type. And I don't know whether that's just because the dual wielding sort of doesn't really fit a multiple HP unit, and Eclipse is doing it again. He's driving me absolutely insane with his insistence on doing this. Commit forward all of your men, for God's sake. The only reason not to would be if the enemy has got sort of a skirmish sort of force that they can use to fire into a blob, but they don't anymore. I thought he was going to do it, but he's not. He's just moving his men very slightly closer. It's infuriating. It really is. Uruk-hai infantry holding back this Umbar force. It's been a very good battle, this, in spite of my frustrations with some of the decisions that have been made. What's going on here? Slowly but surely, the Blackback Berserkers are turning this around, which is exactly my point. You know, that the Harbingers of Castamere are supposed to be on the same sort of level as the Blackback Berserkers, and yet, even with the support of a multiple HP spear unit in the Nyrun Arrow Royal Guard, the Blackback Berserkers are going to be able to win this. That, to me, is... it's not right. The Harbingers should be stronger than this. They should be able to go toe-to-toe with a unit like the Blackback Berserkers, and I think it's because they're not AP, and the Blackback Berserkers, I think they are. And that's a big distinction, and it kind of makes the Harbingers not great, in my opinion. They are an elite unit, and they will still do really well against low-tier units, but do you really want to spend a huge amount of money on a unit which is just good against mid to low-tier units? In this sort of situation, you need every advantage you can get, and the Harbingers just tend to be really lackluster, in my opinion. They don't even have a shield like units like the Carmel's Chosen, so they don't have that sort of safety net going for them. Needless to say, Froggy will probably win this fight over here, but I think the defenders are going to lose, which is a real shame, because this was well within their means to win. And you can see here that the Harbingers of Castamere, they are going to commit themselves, but it's going to... well, actually, they've got some Corsair Fencers that were hidden, which, you know, that's a substantial unit there. But even so, it still says defeat seems certain. The fact that they've got Corsair Fencers as well just makes Eclipse's refusal to commit units to a nice, comprehensive defence with the pikes and the catapult even more of a crime, in my opinion. Yeah, the Harbingers are over here now, but the Nazkai are in melee, and obviously the Nazkai, as I've said before, very strong. Certainly going to be able to defeat the Harbingers one-to-one. And I don't think the catapult crew is going to make too much of a difference there, and you can actually see the individual guards of Orthanc are slowly but surely filtering their way through. Blackback Berserkers' defeat is a distinct possibility now, but even so, I still think my point about the Harbingers kind of stands. There's not I've never really seen, and a good example of this would be, you often see the Blackbacks brought when people have a choice of their army. If you play as Umbar, you very rarely see the Harbingers of Castamere brought as a choice of the player. They are much more likely to bring the Warlords or something else. The Nyrun Arrow Royal Guard as well are much more likely because they're safer. You know, they might not have the most killing power, but it's a good safe place to put your general or something like that. And obviously the range, the ability to inflict some range damage is also nice. There goes the Isengard General. Froggy's forces are now filtering up this this mountainside here. They're going to have to get through Uruk-hai Berserkers. Casimir's Rangers, unlikely to do that. The Naru Sentinels could, you know, it's not beyond the realm of possibility that this is still won by the defenders. They are still ahead by a single percentage point. Defeat seems certain for the fencers. Nazkai, Guards of Orthanc, Snaga, I don't know, the fact that there's a big chunk of Snaga over here. I probably spent all of this, the last like 10 or so minutes shitting on the defenders and they end up winning, but very back and forth at the very least. But even if the defenders end up winning, what I'll say is I'll believe that they could have ended up winning it more convincingly than they have. Like, you cannot convince me that it wouldn't have been better if Eclipse came down this hill, posted up all of his resources here, and then by this point Froggy would have already been attacking the Isengard assault in the rear, and the defenders would have been well on their way to winning this battle. As it is, it's still up in the air somewhat. The Uruk-hai Berserkers still doing their best, and actually the presence of these catapults is making it a little bit more tricky for the pikes to get into formation. Castimir's Rangers, maybe not the ideal opponent for the Uruk-hai Berserkers. What is going on over here? Still, this fight is going on. The Blackback Berserkers proving their prowess by taking on two very expensive units. In terms of florins, this would be about double the Blackback Berserkers' value, maybe a little bit less than double, but around that sort of ballpark. And they were almost able to win, so it's not such a egregious thing when it comes to the Naru Royal Guard, because they're not really designed for fighting that sort of units, but the Harbingers, Uruk-hai Berserkers here, doing their best to hold back Froggy's advance, but yeah, they're going to lose that. So this fight up here on the top is going to turn out to be extremely key, and it looks as though Isengard are just about going to pull it out. There's not very many Nazkai left, but the Guards of Orthanc and their survivability should be enough to wear down the Harbingers. There's still a unit of Blackback Berserkers here as well, a unit of 21 of them, which should be enough to account for the dwindling number of Corsair fencers. It's been an incredibly close fight. Very glad that I was sent this, even if I've been very pedantic about the tactics, but then that's kind of what people want me to be. I hope people don't take it personally when I point out things I think are wrong. And I certainly don't want everyone in the comments to sort of pick on individual players and say that that's incorrect and that they're terrible and they shouldn't play the game, because that doesn't help at all. You know, I want people to continue to send me battles like this if they can, so I can continue to showcase people's hard work, and they might be tempted not to if people in the comments do nothing but insult them. I hope that what I say is taken more constructively than that, but again, if my tone is off, then I do apologise for that. Corsair Fencers doing their best with their dual rapiers, but ultimately it's not going to be enough. The attackers are going to take this hill. Meanwhile, down here, Froggy's forces, only 10 Naru Sentinels left, and the Berserkers doing an admirable job of holding these guys in place. The Hashari Stalker's probably going to get into melee at this point. The Berserkers will lose this, but only just. How many men does Froggy still have over here? That is the question. He has 11 Harbingers of Castamere and 1 Naru Royal Guard. That's not going to be hugely significant, I don't think. Could be the sort of thing which swings the battle in favour of the defenders. We shall see. And the Berserkers are trying to do their best, but they will eventually lose this, but they've done an admirable job, and honestly the distractions that they have provided might be enough to win the attackers this battle at this point. The Blackbacks are starting to head back down the hill. The Harbingers are now being cut down by what remains of the Guards of Orthanc, the Goblin King bodyguard, and the Nars Kai. Really, though, the only unit up here which is in any significant number are the Guards of Orthanc. Now that the Blackback Berserkers are heading down the hill to try and deal with the Hashari. Hashari going to try and they are going to get some nice body-piercing shots off on the Blackbacks. I'm not sure if they're going to really get anything in terms of kills here, though. And the Hashari are going to run. But the Blackbacks may as well just engage with something at this point in time. I mean, they're probably going to try and go for the Hashari. They might not have a choice. They'll probably have to fight the Rangers and what remains of the Sentinels. This is more manpower which the defenders are going to lose, because the Blackbacks have already seen how strong they can be. And they're trying to make it so that the Hashari have got a nice shot into the side of this unit. What's going on down here? Still the same. Yeah, okay. Just keeping an eye on that, because that's going to be the only other units which are going to be of any consequence in this fight now. While the Blackback Berserkers obviously going to be dishing out the damage. The Hashari Stalkers are going to do their best in terms of what damage they can mete out, but there are only 6 of them at this point, so their DPS is not going to be huge. Blackback Berserkers are not the most durable of these kinds of units, so it is worth mentioning. Meanwhile, it's been a tough fight up here, but finally the Harbingers are going to be brought to their knees. And I think the attackers just about going to have the manpower to see this one through. And yeah, so they'll have Guards of Orthanc and a few scraps of other units which they can send down here as well. Which I don't think the defenders are going to have enough. To be fair though, those Blackback Berserkers, well, they sort of stretched themselves out. They've gone after the Hashari Stalkers, and without the body-piercing projectiles, that might be the final nail in the coffin of the defenders. And this is looking like the end. Blackback Berserker's going to turn around and charge into the rear of these Castamir's Rangers at this point. One of them tried to stop that, but it's going to be a short-lived endeavour. Someone has admitted defeat. That was probably Anxfitz, considering he had a very small army to begin with. So technically speaking, the attackers did have a numbers advantage, because Harad's army was significantly smaller than everyone else's. Everyone else had like a full stack. Harad had maybe a half stack, maybe even less than that. They only had 3 units of cav, a few Hashari, and a champion of Nafarat. So I think, you know, the same adage does apply, where the mistakes the defenders make are amplified more so than the mistakes the attackers make. And I still think sending in the Temple Guard for the attackers so early was questionable. Pasternak, it was difficult for Pasternak, I think, based on the approach that he was given. You know, his options were relatively few. He had to charge in there, and it was always going to be tough. But even so, there maybe were a few things he could have done better, arguably, to make things a little bit easier on himself. But ultimately, the defenders' mistakes have come back to bite them. The few units that they sent in wastefully early on, stuff like, you know, just sending forward a unit of Belagire archers or Belagire footmen for really no reason, and just watching them get surrounded. The Castamir's Legion in particular was an early loss, which was very unfortunate. And obviously, then I've made my position on layered defences very clear. I'm of the opinion that layered defences overall are not necessarily a bad thing, but you need to have a few very significant layers, not a series of mini layers which the attackers can just one by one smash their way through. You know, I have never once seen that sort of thing work in a scenario, and particularly here with Eclipse's army, it did not go well for him at all. And in the end, it was well within the defenders' means to win this battle, certainly. I honestly feel as though if Eclipse had committed his forces down here, and if he had managed to keep those Naru Naaru Sentinels supported, Froggy would have had to travel less distance to surround this attack up here, and this front line would have held much, much better, especially seeing as there were even a unit of those Corsair Fencers hidden, which I didn't even notice, so it would have made it even better with their AP. But as it was, he had committed himself to trying to layer the defence, and it went badly. Again, if this was something to do with the rules, then I apologise for all of the criticism. But if that is a rule, it's a very strange one that should probably just be removed. But yeah, well played to the attackers though. It was a decently organised attack. They used their resources where they could. Things got a little bit hairy for them in the mid-game when they took so much damage from the catapult, from the crossbow corsairs, from the javelins. But ultimately, they did have the manpower to withstand. And in particular, while Mordor may have used up their elites early on, the elites of the Misty Mountains and Isengard were what ultimately saw the attackers over the line. And in this case, obviously, it was a 3v3 technically, so the attackers didn't have as much of a numbers advantage as maybe they traditionally would have, and they still just about managed to pull it out, which I'm sure people will probably dislike the video for because they can't stand it when the attackers win. But whatever, there's so little I can do about that. I guess I've just got to take that on the chin. Just a single one left, and this is going to be the end. No, we are victorious from the announcer. Well, regardless. One of these armies got more kills. I think that was probably Froggy, seeing as he was on the front when most of the more numerous units were committed forwards. It's possible it was Eclipse with the catapult, but I'm kind of the opinion that probably the combination of the crossbow corsairs and the Casimir's Rangers would certainly be enough to give Froggy this amount of kills. Obviously, Engsfit's doing well with the amount of men he had, but obviously, you know, Hashari Stalkers, Champions of Nafrat, you'd expect them to get a decent amount of kills, and they did, almost as many as one of his Unbark Patriots even. And it was the Misty Mountains who got the most kills for the attackers. Again, not too surprised about that. The Blackback Berserkers obviously did very well for themselves. Crossbow Corsairs, a lot of AP in their army, which certainly helped against Umbar. And Mordor were the ones that charged in first. They charged their elites in. They were willing to take the brunt of the defenders' fury, which is admirable in a way, but obviously that does have an effect on your kill count. But it worked out in the end for the attackers. So yeah, a very good scenario, even if I complained about the some of the tactics towards the end of that, Dorwinian. Nazgul getting a lot of kills. It can be very difficult to focus them down. The Temple Executioners getting a lot of kills. Obviously, all of these elite units got kills, but they were also dealt with earlier on in the battle. Like obviously, usually you expect to see the Temple Executioners towards the end. Rannon Archers doing well for themselves. Overall, a pretty even spread across the Mordor player Master Blaster's army there. So yeah, big thank you to Master Blaster for sending this one in. A pretty long scenario, this one. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you'll join me for whatever is next, which I think will probably be a video which contains 2 battles rather than just 1.